Chris McDougall, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
I am delighted, Alicia. Your message was so rejuvenating, it was just so happy and emotional. I was just all about it.
Oh my goodness. I was a little bit nervous in the reaching out because I'm like, I hope he doesn't think I'm crazy that I'm asking him to be on the Yoke and Abundance Wise Woman podcast, but I have to talk to him.
I think actually that was 90% of the reason I was intrigued. I'm like, I'm honored, really? Because I'm not for everybody. I'm kind of a big personality. And I think that, if I had a podcast devoted to empowering women, I'm not sure if I would invite me on.
Well, I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm so glad that I get to talk to you today and to let the listeners know who you are. You're kind of an icon in the running world as far as, you've written Born to Run, and then the book that I reached out to you about, which is Running with Sherman. And so you're a big deal in the running community.
The Born to Run is a kind of a big deal. I don't think I am.
I don't know.
I'm not sure because, where we live, as you know, from Running with Sherman, is very isolated. And almost all of our neighbors are Amish. So they're not familiar with, they don't know who the hell I am. I'm just a guy with the donkeys and the sheep down the street. And that's it, which is cool.
Right.
So I don't really have a whole lot of interaction, so I'm not really sure. I know the books had a big impact, but I'm not sure if I walk into a random 5K, if anybody knows or cares who the hell I am.
Well, I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina, and you've been here. You've been to my running shop.
Yes, I have. Actually, it was really cool. Half Moon Outfitters is a small, kind of family-run chain of stores, and is it Beezer? What's the name of the owner? Is it Beezer?
Oh, John Dewey. John Dewey.
There's another guy.
I don't know the other guy.
Yeah. Anyway, so he invited me down, and I went to all these places down south. And honestly, God, it taught me a lesson. It's like the second you cross over into Richmond, America gets better. People just are warm and friendly. So yeah, I've been to Greensboro. I had a blast there. Ran the trails. There's a really cool park nearby. Ran the trails. I had a really good time.
Well, okay. So Running with Sherman, I have to tell you how I found your book, Running with Sherman. My brother-in-law is obsessed with donkeys. He just thinks they are the coolest animal in the whole world. And my sister didn't know anything about your book, Born to Run. And she was at the library and she sees this book, Running with Sherman, and it's got a donkey on the cover. And she's like, oh my God, I'm going to get this for Corey as a joke because he's just going to find this so funny. Who knew that you could run with donkeys? So she brings it home. Corey starts reading it, even though it was supposed to be a joke. And he was like, Anne, this is actually a phenomenal book. You have to read this. So then my sister reads the book, and then they tell the rest of my family. My whole family has read this book. Probably, and I don't think there is another book in the history of books that the entire family has been like, yes, that book's amazing. And so I read a ton of self-help because that's kind of the work that I'm in. And I'm so over it. I mean, it's great. I love it. But I'm you need a break from that type of stuff. I'm I just need a good story, a good book. And I thought, okay, I'm going to start listening to this while I'm running. And I just, from the beginning to the end, I wanted to keep running on even horrible running days because I wanted to keep listening to your story.
That is a song. If there's a song that can be played at my funeral, I want your words to be put to music. And that's what I want. That's what I want to hear. But we got to circle back. Number one, let's both make a mental note that I've got a little gift for Corey that I got to send him. Okay. So in about 10 minutes, I'm going to completely forget this. So between the two of us. And number two is, I love the fact that your sister Anne used my book as a gag gift, like a little talking plastic turd, and it became a family experience. So it started as a novelty gag and turned into a kind of a cool thing for the family.
Yeah, it absolutely did. So I have to ask, so tell, if you could, please tell everyone who Sherman is and how he came to be a part of your family.
Sure. So there's a lot of backstory there. So let me try and boil it down to a little bit. I guess it comes down to this: is that I was born and raised in Philly, and then worked overseas for a lot of years as a reporter. My wife grew up in Hawaii, and mostly in Honolulu. So we're not country people even a little bit. And even living in Philly, Lancaster, where the Amish are, is an hour away. But no one ever went out to Lancaster. Why would you go there? It's like hillbilly country. We never went to Lancaster. But we had this moment where my wife and I were living in downtown Philly, and we were raising our daughter. She was 2. And we decided, this is like the digital age. Neither one of us, we don't have to be in Philly. We can be anywhere. But we wanted to kind of stay close by where my family is. So we ended up actually in Lancaster County, but not even like the developed part of Lancaster, like where the stores are. We ended up in this place called Peach Bottom, Pennsylvania, which is exactly what it sounds like. Peach Bottom is, by the way, my cat is attacking me. Someone wants attention back there. Peach Bottom is super rural, and almost all of our neighbors are Amish and Mennonite. And once we were there, it just became this kind of natural evolution where, like, hey, let's get a duck, let's get a chicken, let's get a sheep. And bit by bit, it started to grow. One cat's about ready to go out the window, by the way. And until the moment when my daughter was 9 years old, and we asked her what she wanted for her 10th birthday, and her answer, which your brother-in-law, I'm sure would be natural to him, was a donkey. Like a donkey. You're like, come on, dude, you're not getting a donkey. But the wheels started to turn, and it didn't seem actually all that crazy because we had the acreage for it. I knew nothing about donkeys, but they seemed kind of like docile, like fun size. They're like instead of the giant M&M or the giant like Milky Way bar, they're like the fun size bar of a horse, so like a little mini horse. And so that's how Sherman. Well, before that's not exactly how Sherman entered our life. That's how we got the idea. Do you want to go on with how we actually?
Please, yeah.
Sure. So the thing about it is that donkeys are not like East Coast animals. They're like Rocky Mountain, prospect, or desert animals. They're not like horse country animals. So I'd never actually seen a donkey anywhere in Pennsylvania or on the East Coast. So I started to ask around to my neighbors, like, anybody know somebody who's got like a donkey for sale? And I got a lot of no's before one of our neighbors, a Mennonite farmer named Wes, came to me and said, yeah, listen, I heard you're looking for a donkey. We got a situation where we got to get a donkey out of this guy's hands. And there was someone in his church, in his community, that had become a hoarder. And one of the animals he had locked up in a shed was this donkey. So I thought, perfect. It's a win for everybody. Free donkey, helps. Because Wes and his small church were subsidizing. This guy was spending so much money on animal feed, he couldn't feed his own family. And so the church members were paying for this. It was a problem for everybody. So my daughters and I get in the truck, and we're driving over with Wes, and we're excited, and we're like thinking up names for it. And we get to the guy's house, and we go into this shed. And as soon as you walk into the shed, this is like the kind of place where like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre would take place, that's grim, awful, dark, damp place. And it had recently been flooded, and it was still full of like water and mud. So the goats were like standing up on bales of straw just to get out of the mud. And we're looking around in the dark, like, I don't see any donkeys. And over in this one corner was this one little stall, and still don't see a donkey. But way in the back, there was like this dark shade, and it started to, I know I get this way too. I get choked up about it. It started moving toward us, and it was this horribly neglected, caked with manure and mud donkey. And my first thought was like, this is not really what we're shopping for. We wanted the cute in the field prancy donkey, not this, death wish donkey. That was my first thought. My second thought was, we're not leaving it here. It's not staying. But the funny thing was, the hoarder didn't want to let it go. So even though we're offering this animal 5 green acres and its own dedicated barn, like life of freaking luxury, the hoarder's like, no, he's family. And I just pulled Wes aside and said, look, he's not staying. So either you get him to go or I'm going to get him to go, but the donkey's not staying here. And Wes came through and he was able to talk this guy into letting us have the donkey only for 2 years. Like that was the promise. And unfortunately, though, when the donkey got to our home, when Sherman got to our home, he was in much worse shape than we even realized. We didn't realize that his hooves had become so monstrously overgrown, he couldn't even walk. He was like standing on these like flippers. And that was it. So suddenly, here I am, a novice, dumbass, don't really know much hobby farmer with a seriously sick equine on my hands that I had to kind of figure things out for.
Chris, the way you write about that, I mean, you go in knowing that this is a book about running with a donkey. So you know that Sherman's going to make it, but the way you write in that, I mean, it felt harrowing, like the experience. And I can't imagine what you all were like, what a roller coaster for Sherman and all of you to be going through together. It was really touching. And I really want everyone I know to read your book. So go get this book and listen to this story. But the thing is that Chris, you're an amazing storyteller. So you would think that this story, it is so simple, but each post in the journey, guidepost in this journey, has its own rabbit hole of stories, which is part of the beauty of your book. I mean, I loved hearing about your Amish neighbors. I learned things that I had no idea about the Amish. I mean, I didn't realize that it's not that they just can't have technology. It's a deliberate, like, discernment about what technology to use and why. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that and what that's like to be in a community of Amish and Mennonite?
Yeah, first I got to address your compliment too. I got a great piece of advice from an editor of mine years ago. And it was actually when I was starting to work on Born to Run, and I was really struggling with it because I had so many subplots and different stories and characters. I'm like, how do you weave all this stuff together? And he said, look, man, tell the story from your beginning, not where you are now, where you were at the beginning. And it was an eye opener, like changed everything because, by the time you've learned enough to start writing a book, it's become second nature to you. Like, I know all this stuff already. Mm-hmm. And he goes, take yourself back to the point where you didn't know anything and tell the story that way. Tell it as you start to uncover and understand. And if you can put yourself into that kind of emotional state where you recall how you felt and how confused you were, then the story really starts to unspool. So I've been lucky with these books to have experiences where I felt in over my head. Born to Run for sure, Running with Sherman, in over my head. And to get back to that, I still feel it today. I still remember that moment when I looked and I go, oh my God, what's wrong with his feet? Like, I remember like the panic I felt and thinking, this is my daughter's 10th birthday present, like, happy birthday, Soph. Let's dig a big hole in the backyard for this dead donkey.
Oh my God, how awful would that be?
Right. So thank you. I appreciate it a lot that it worked in the storytelling, but I think it's kind of getting on the sliding board and just letting it go. And then another thing too is that, I was at this conference a couple of years ago where I was supposed to be a guest speaker with an anthropologist and a psychiatrist, and it was at Harvard University, and it was addressing the evolution, the execution, and the psychology of sports and athletics. So looking at recreational sports and like how you address it physically, mentally, and historically. And one of the guests, one of the fellow speakers, was a guy named Dr. John Rady. He's a psychiatrist at Harvard Medical School, and he specializes in attention deficiency and ADHD. And that's why he was there, because he was going to talk about how a little bit of exercise has had dramatic improvements in children suffering from ADHD. Like, you can they've actually done this. They'll put a group of kids on treadmills with their math books and have them do math class while they're walking and jogging on a treadmill. their test scores skyrocket.
Wow.
So that's what he was there to talk about. So right before we go on stage, there's a little reception, and the president of Harvard's there, Dr. Drew Faust, and uh, I'm meeting everybody. And this guy like kind of pats me on the back, and he goes, I bet school was really tough for you, with your chronic ADHD. And I'm like, dude, I'm not ADHD. And he kind of gives me this like consoling look. He's like, oh yeah, you are. And I'm like, what the hell, man? And then I started to think about it, like, oh my God, like suddenly so much of my life like makes sense. And he started to break it down for me. He's like, yeah, I saw you come through the door. You're 15 minutes late. You came barreling through. You're sweaty. You almost knocked over the president of Harvard on your way to the buffet table. You didn't excuse yourself. And I'm like, it's having a video replay of your behavior. Like, oh my God. Like, but then, oh yeah. So anyway, when you talk about like running with Sherman, I really like self-indulge a lot of times because this stuff. And in the middle of writing the exact section you're talking about, I'm like, does anybody really want me to go back to the 1700s and talk about the formation of the Amish church? Is that really what they're here for?
No, that I just want to know what it's like to live in that community. And they seem like amazing people. And I was astounded that you're going on runs with them, and they have a the evening
The
moonlight.
full moon running club. Yeah.
Was that Rushspringer? Rush
Oh, Rumspringa.
Rumspringa, yes.
Yeah.
I was just like, I didn't know that the Amish would go running.
Yeah, so that's that. So again, there's that thing where like, should I include this in the book? Not include it, and I'm glad I did because you're interested. So that was a real revelation to us. When we moved to Peach Bottom, my impression of the Amish was just based on appearances. I know they have these like black and gray buggies. They wear black clothes. They got these kind of funky long beards, and I'm just thinking really like sour, dour, like fun sucker kind of people. And then the reality is completely the opposite, and which again would make sense if you thought about it. Like a culture that deals face to face, that isn't constantly looking at a screen, a thing in their hand, but they're looking you in the eye. They entertain themselves by talking, by telling jokes, by telling stories. They're very family oriented, and to be family oriented means you got to really enjoy kids. You can't be family oriented and think kids are a pain in the ass to have to be ferberized. You got to enjoy them, and that's what you say. So again, I don't want to overly glamorize it. It's a tough life. They believe in a lot of things that I don't believe in, but on a person to person basis, I've never met people ever that are kinder or more warm and friendly and social than the Amish, by far, and welcoming too, super welcoming. I show up asking a favor, always asking a favor. And yeah, sure, come on in. Let's show you. What do you need help with? Well, here's a quick little example. So our closest neighbor, Josh, runs the chainsaw repair shop. And he's super busy because around us, everybody's got 15 chainsaws and they're always breaking. So Josh is working around the clock. We had a piano we had bought for our kids to learn on. When they didn't need it anymore, we offered to give it away. And so this woman who's a single grandmother, her daughter died, her kids had died. She was raising her own granddaughter as a single grandmother. I would love to have this for our 5-year-olds. Can you drop it off? I have no way of getting it. So I have a truck, but it's a freaking piano. So I go over to Josh, say, look, dude, after work today, can you help me out with this? You and your brothers? And he's like, what do you mean? No, fine. Takes the closed sign, puts it on the front of the door, grabs his brothers, walks over to my house is a quarter-mile away. We walk over, lift this truck, piano in the truck, drive over to this woman's house, bring it into her house, driving back. I said, Josh, dude, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. Said, no, thank you. I never would have done that. Like, I never would have done that if it wasn't for you. Like, why are you thanking me for moving a freaking piano? But that's what it's like. To him, it was a little adventure. He got to do a favor for a woman, and he genuinely was grateful and happy for that little adventure that somehow I lassoed him into.
That's amazing. I come from a farming family, not Amish or Mennonite, but my grandparents were farmers. My dad was a farmer. my dad, when we were younger, we would go on Friday afternoons after school. He'd pick us up and we'd go to my grandparents' farm, and we'd help pick in the fields, and the kids would just play in the lane or whatnot. But I have an idea, I think, of maybe what that community might possibly be like, just given the community that I grew up in. But hearing things everybody needs to go read your book, because these stories are just absolutely phenomenal, and you'll learn things by reading Running with Sherman that you didn't even know you wanted to know. So
I couldn't have said it better myself.
it's so good. So I have to ask, so how is Sherman?
Sherman is living the life of luxury these days. So a lot happened to him over the past couple of years. And I'm trying to think of like the highlights. I think number one was meeting Zeke.
Mm.
And this is somebody, so that's how Sherman's doing. Let me tell you how Sherman and Zeke are
Yeah,
just
I wanted to know about Zeke too. So let's
yeah.
let's wrap it all in there.
They're both booming these days. So, as you know from the book, Zeke was a kid in trouble. Talk about getting emotional. Greatest kid in the world. And you see this guy, he should be like in Baywatch. He's like a handsome, strong, muscular, smart, funny dude. And he was dying from clinical depression, and so was his equally like gorgeous, cool sister.
Mm.
And I know his parents, they're amazing parents. And it's one of these things that really just smacks you in the head, makes you realize depression is a disease, it's not a mood, because you cannot create a better environment for young people than the Cook family had.
Right.
And to have these two kids thinking about ending their own lives is just utterly baffling until you understand this is an infection in their system that needs to be treated like a disease. So when Zeke joined us, he and Sherman, bam, they became like blood brothers, instant bonds, which I actually felt bad about, because Sherman is a donkey, and donkeys are like devilish and mischievous and very independent minded. And this kid who's already suffering a little bit of a self-esteem issue does not need to be vexed by this devil donkey. So that was the cool and surprising first bond, was between Sherman and Zeke. But the other thing, which I think really changed Sherman's life, was when I got it through my head that the best way to influence any creature is to not like force it, but just guide it. And with Sherman, we had this idea, hey, let's turn this donkey into my running partner. He'll get exercise, and he needs the movement, and movement is medicine. It's all great on paper until you try to bring this proposition to the donkey, who doesn't know what you mean by running partner and is not down with the program. And we kind of try to coerce and train and lead, and nothing. Until I realized that Sherman loves to be in a herd. He loves to be surrounded. And the first herd was actually my daughters. And we took him out for a walk, and like, oh yeah, Maya and Sophie. And then Sherman was good to go. Even prior to that was our goat, Lawrence, who followed Lawrence. I know, right? Follow Lawrence around. And it finally got through my head, like, when you have a problem with a donkey, just throw more donkeys at the problem. And so we ended up with two of our neighbor Tanya's donkeys, Flower and Matilda. And so once we had these three donkeys, so here you have the scenario is this creature who'd been living in the dark, isolated in a stall, is now out in the sunshine with two buddies, Flower and Matilda, and this like whole gang of people that just really dig him, like me and my daughters, my wife, Zeke, our Amish running friends. Everybody was kind of rallying around. Oh man, I'm getting all misty-eyed again.
I love it.
Yeah.
So, okay, you decide to give Sherman a job. He needs a job, and running is his job, but you couldn't just stop at running. It had to have a goal, which running does have to have a goal, or like, what's the point, right?
Well, I'm not sure about that, but Alicia, I'm going to actually reenact the scene from the book for you because I happen to have a pair of scissors handy. So this is like, you can now see what I confronted. So the person, if there's one person instrumental in saving Sherman's life, it's definitely our friend Tanya,
Yeah.
hands down, because Tanya is actually the reason why Sophie got the idea in the first place. One day we're out hiking on a trail and we saw this woman riding a donkey. Like, I'd never seen this before, but a woman in a saddle on a donkey. And this woman was like cool and like body and tough, like exactly who you expect to find riding a donkey in the woods of Pennsylvania. And all the kids were like charmed by Tanya and her donkey. And then she rides off and we all forget about it except for Sophie, who's like, man, like that chick is my hero. And that's why she got the idea in her 9-year-old brain that someday that she wanted to be riding a donkey like Tanya. So when we get Sherman, I'm like, man, I don't know what to do. And I asked around the neighbors, like, does anybody know that woman with the donkey? And if you're like a woman in Pennsylvania who rides a donkey, everybody knows who you are. So like, oh yeah, it's Tanya. Here's her number. So I call Tanya up and she zooms over to the house. And her husband at the time was a farrier. He trimmed the hooves. And then Tanya just like started to whirlwind around this sick donkey and give it antibiotics and painkillers. And she had these shears and she's using the shears to cut the caked manure out of its fur.
Oh.
And that's when all of a sudden she turns around to me and she's like waving the shears in my face, like, listen, you're not just going to stick him out in the field. You understand? Like, he needs a purpose. He's been neglected. And I'm like, okay. Take the sharp object
away
from my eyeballs. And that's what gave us the idea. I don't necessarily believe that notion, or I challenge that notion that you need a purpose to run, because I think that could also be a real reason why people don't like to run, because they feel like we live in a culture where you can't admit that you're just goofing off.
Running to run.
Like, if you're home watching Netflix and you hear someone in the driveway, you got to turn it off. I'm going to go in the kitchen, right? You can never really admit that I'm just relaxing and having a good time. Everybody's got to be work and productive. Mm-hmm. And so it happens with running. If you tell someone, hey, I'm starting to run. Oh, really? You're going to race? Like, you going to do a marathon? Like, what's your best marathon? They just challenge you. Like, take this fun and turn it into work as quickly as possible. So,
well, you know what? I think maybe you're right. I don't want to turn running into work per se, but my why for running is it gives me an oxytocin boost, and I need that oxytocin boost. So that's my why. That's what's running's job for me.
Oh, right on. Okay. Super, super great answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Enjoyment. You're in it for the pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes I need that anchor, right? Which leads me to another question. So Zeke, one of the things, Zeke's becomes a running buddy to this awesome pack that has come together. And part of it is because chemical stuff happening in the brain, depression-wise. And there's a hypothesis that maybe it was because when he was younger, he'd do 2-hour workouts swimming, and that it consistently raised the good chemicals in his brain, but it was like getting a hit of drugs all the time. What have you, and you give a lot of research on how tough that can be. Did you come across any research around like, what's the happy medium?
Yes, or not so much the happy medium, but what's the danger spot?
Yeah.
And I don't have it like off the top of my head too, but I believe it was like a Dutch study, but what they started to look at was the prevalence of eating disorders and depression among swimmers who train above a certain number of hours per day. And I think you actually zeroed in right around what the number was. It's like the 2-hour mark, the daily 2-hour mark is the level that could be creating a chemical dependence. And there's an interesting thing about it too, Lisha, is that, my friend Barefoot Ted, who, if you've read Born to Run, he's like this maniac that like bursts out of the pages. But every once in a while I'll talk to Ted and he just says something that just like stops him in my tracks. Like, dude, that was so wise. Like, I can't believe it came out of your mouth. But he talks a lot about the difference between practice and training. And training is very focused, very regimented, and purpose driven toward a goal. Practice is, I'm just trying to get good at it. I'm just trying to figure it out and get good at it. And there's no goal other than to not suck. And so with Ted, that's what his approach to running is. I'm not training, I'm practicing. And if I do it for 10 minutes and I feel satisfied, I'm done. If I do it for an hour and I'm not satisfied, I'll keep going. And so it kind of accordions back and forth. Whereas training, the second you start, I'm doing 90 minutes at this pace, blah, 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 very. And so I think what happens with young people, and again, it seems to be especially prevalent among swimmers, because, Michael Phelps and other elite swimmers have all wrestled with seriously dangerous bouts of depression. But it seems to be taking young people in a pool, which is a super controlled environment. There's no other pleasure you're going to get. You're not like smelling roses or passing a ball. You're just churning at a very consistent rate, back and forth, back and forth. And that is believed to bring up those levels of cortisol and serotonin to a point where your body is reacting to it. And it's the same dosage every day for the same amount of time. And that's it. Basically, you're hooked on the drug.
Yeah, that I thought a lot about that. I do something in December called Markathon. And have you heard of Markathon? You run every day in December for a minimum of 25 minutes or a 5K, whichever comes first. That's the minimum. So this was my third year of doing it. And this year was the first time I thought I'd had really great mileage the months leading up to December. And I thought, I'm going to just keep my normal running schedule and just make sure I run every day. So no rest days, just run every day. And then I'd never run a marathon before. Christmas Day, I felt really good. So I was like, I'm going to run a half marathon. So I run a half marathon. And then a week later, I'm like, I'm still feeling really good. I've never run a marathon. Maybe I should run a marathon. So I run a marathon. So
wait, just like 1 week, you did 13 miles and next week you did 26 miles? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was it was just one of those, sometimes your body can you've been practicing and your body's just like, I'm ready for it. And you meet your body where it is and you're like, okay, let's try this. So I ended up with 185 miles for December. And I thought, okay, like this was a good December.
Yeah.
January, I'm like, I want to back off, but I don't want to back off as much. So I backed down to about 100 miles, 105, 106 miles for January. February rolls around and I've got some health stuff that comes up. And December's tough for me, but I swear the backing down in mileage affected me. Like I got really low, probably lower than I normally get. And I think that there was something it's like I backed down too fast on that mileage, and it affected things. And when I read what you were talking about with Zeke and the research that you brought into it, I thought there's something to that we should pay attention to.
It's a thing. I think we don't do enough in our lives, which is to not blame ourselves, but to look at the behavior. So, you're feeling down, and I think most people's reaction is, come on, snap out of it. What's wrong with me?
Right.
And instead of like, no, dude, what's wrong with my behavior? What did I do differently? And so I think our first reaction is assume, look, there's some flaw, some weakness that I need to correct, as opposed to no, let's just take a breath. I'm a fine person. What other variable is playing a role here?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think with athletes, it's doubly dangerous because the whole message we get all the time is like, grind it out, grit through it, no pain, no gain, and just fight your way through. And you take these young kids who have been raised on a discipline of swimming, and now they're getting down. They don't want to train anymore. They're having trouble leaving the house. The message isn't, hey, maybe we did something to them. It's what's their problem.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. And that was something I appreciated so much about this book is that, so I'm a positive psychology practitioner, and you brought in like all of that Chris Peterson is he's like the father of positive psychology. And he said, you can sum it up in 3 words: other people matter. And so not only other people in your case, but animals. So you brought this, like, it's in the subtitle of your book, this ragtag crew together, donkeys and people, right? Not something that you expect. And there's that common purpose, right? So you wanted to help Sherman, and then you had a friend who needed help, and then that friend comes in and he gets to help Sherman. So there's so much purpose, and there's so much. And then, oh gosh, we haven't even talked about your awesome wife yet, Mika, who is like the glue that quietly holds everything together, and um but you bring in the positive psychology without even using those words. I don't even know if you were doing it, but you were illustrating in your book how important physical exercise is to mental health, as well as that component of caring for each other.
Yeah, I'll tell you one big takeaway for me was people really want to help. And I came from a sort of background of you don't ask for help, you don't ask for favors. And it's a hard thing for me to do. It makes me very uncomfortable. But in this situation, these were like, man, I had to call Danya or the donkey dies. I have to ask Amos and Josh for help, our Amish neighbors, or I'm never going to be able to train this thing. You have to ask. I have to call Karen and Linda, these two bizarre strangers in Virginia, to drive the donkeys, or else donkeys don't get to the race. And every step of the way, there's always that moment of hesitation. Like, I hate to ask a favor. And then afterwards, I think to myself, why did I hesitate? They were so down with it, and they were so helpful. So that was. I think what you're talking about is so important. Other people matter, but it's a two-way street. That people want to help. They want to get the gift of letting their talents shine through, like the gift of being useful, and in return, it's such a validating message. Like when you reach out to a neighbor and you're not sure, and then you're met with such warmth, and love, it makes you feel good too. Like, man, people don't suck, So yeah, and that's what it came about. And there's a little thing that's on my mind. I hope it's relevant to your question, but I realized, when you start on a book project, you're working on something for like 2 years, and you're in your head with these people and the memories for 2 years. And if it's not pleasant, or not people you don't like, you don't really want to write that kind of a book. I don't. And what I realized after running with Sherman, so I've actually done a book in the middle called Natural Born Heroes. And what I realized when I was working on running with Sherman is that I've been lucky that I really, really love the people that I'm writing about, and not because I'm like sappy or anything like that. It's like, these are freaking awesome people.
Yeah.
And I think that my mind has gravitated toward what are the experiences that I can relish and recreate in my head that I really, really enjoyed. And I think running with Sherman's a perfect example. Everybody in there is just so cool.
Yeah, I want to meet them all.
Yeah.
It's like as the reader, that comes across. You want to meet all of the characters in the book. And
Hey, Alicia, can I tell you one thing?
yes,
Sorry to interrupt you, but so I did this book tour, really long book tour when Sherman first came out. And for the East Coast leg, we went to like 30 cities. And I said, hey, Zeke, you want to come with me? So Zeke was on book tour with me. And I know it was so cool. So we were like just road trip buddies. We started in Lancaster, drove Lancaster, Philly, New York, Boston, blah, blah, and then all the way down to Atlanta and all the way back up again. So again, it was like 30 cities in like 35 days. And Zeke and I road tripping. But we got into this routine where he's a super just polite guy. So at the events, he would come help me set up, make sure I had everything I needed. And then he'd just take a seat quietly in the back. Well, then I realized I'm just going to like throw a picture of Zeke up there and I'll talk about him. And then I'll tell people, hey, by the way, Zeke is right in the back of the room. So if anybody like needs a cuddle or something, go get him. And then it'd just be like, people just magnetized on top of Zeke. So we just had a blast together, and you missed your opportunity. If we gotten down to Greensboro, you might have gotten some FaceTime.
Well, I want to ask a question. No, I'm not going to ask. That's
Oh,
something
shit,
that,
you got to ask now, man.
well, folks need to read the book to answer that question, and I'll ask you that question offline when
Okay.
we're not recording.
I think that's not fair. I think that's not fair, Alicia. I think you gotta.
Not fair. I want to know if Zeke has gotten to do another race with Sherman.
Oh no, he's not gonna. Not. He's not. Oh, that's right. I forgot. Oh man, you know what?
I'm
There's a
trying not to spoil
picture.
endings.
I'm trying to remember. There's a picture. I don't remember if it made it into the book or not. I don't think it did. But there's a picture of Zeke on the sidelines of the Burro race, and his hands are sunk in his pocket, and his like hood of his hoodie's over his head, and he looks so like down, like because what this, you know. So we should back up a little bit, because the idea is that as we were training the donkeys, I knew about this tradition in Colorado of burro racing, of people who run with their donkeys distances up to 29 miles at 10,000 feet. It's an old miners, prospectors tradition. And so burro racing is a very vibrant and competitive sport. You run next to your donkey. So we thought, hey, as long as we're running, let's train for this race. And so it became this team, me and Zeke, my wife Mika, and these three donkeys, Flower, Matilda, and the Shermanator, training for this race. And then like freaking week before race day, what does Zeke do but break his stupid foot? And so this guy who was done so much, and then his moment of glory comes and he's got to like sit it out with a walking cast.
Oh my goodness.
And so no, he never got a chance to race with Sherman. But I think the thing about it is, maybe this is your experience too. It's definitely my experience. Once it's race day, to me, it's so kind of anticlimactic. Like the race becomes kind of a hassle. Like, you can run the 13 miles, but now I got to go to the city and register and like get the safety pins through my pants and and line up. Wait in the porta potty line. Like, who needs it? Like, so if you want to run 13 miles, just go do it. So anyway, I think the consolation prize for Zeke is we've done a ton of runs since then, and he's had plenty of time to run with Sherman.
That's awesome. Okay, so let's talk about Mika for a second, because she's an athlete, but she was not a runner. So your wife Mika was an athlete, like a badass, right? I mean, tell us a little bit about what Mika did.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I wouldn't say she was an athlete. She was a dancer. Like her thing was dance.
Oh,
African dance.
Athletic. I'm telling you, I was a dance minor. That is an athlete.
Oh, no doubt about it. Because they've tried to teach me stuff. Memorizing the sequences is beyond my control. Like to coordinate what is in your head with your body, I'm a non-starter. So yeah, I'm not minimizing that at all. But if you asked her, she would say, "Oh no, I'm not into sports. I'm not into games. I want to dance," and she would dance like a maniac. There are days when she would go do an African dance class, and then she's a member of a hip hop group, and then she would come home and practice hula. So it was like 6 hours of like intense dance.
Wow.
But definitely super strong, graceful, all the raw ingredients. But if you say, "Hey, go out and run 6 miles," she's like, "Why? Why would anybody do that when you can like shake your butt to some music?"
So
this is not her.
Yeah, it seemed like in the book that you were like, "We need a runner," and she was like, "Okay." Like, right. Is that what it was really like?
Exactly what it was like. It was literally in the moment of like, we had this thing where Tanya had brought over her big riding donkey Flower, and we were going to try and do this thing where she would ride Flower and then I would run with Sherman. But the problem is Flower is kind of a big sissy and is always afraid of stuff. And so she would start to lead, but then she'd get nervous and she'd run around to hide behind Sherman, and Sherman always wants to follow Flower. So then he would run around behind her, and it's like there's like a swirl of like a toilet bowl, just the two of them, and with me and Tanya in the middle, with these ropes. And so the problem was that we realized, all right, we got to throw another donkey at the problem, because we got a riding donkey who won't lead and another donkey who only wants to follow. And she's like, Matilda. Matilda is this tough little badass mini donkey, fearless. And so she brings Matilda over, and we're like, wait a minute. now we got 3 donkeys and two people. And literally in the moment, like, oh, we never thought about it. Now what, and then hang on a second. And I ran out. Hey, Mika, you want to go run with the donkey? She's like, yeah, all right, whatever. And finished her coffee, put on her shoes, and out she came. That's definitely very, very much who she is. It's this, hey, man, whatever's going on, just say yes, sort it out later.
I love that. Has she kept running since then, or is she done since the race?
Oh, yeah. Well, here's the thing about it. There's a woman named Chrissy Mell. I talk about her in the book. And she has this How to Run Your First Ultra Marathon book. That is, again, it's not Mika's thing. Like going to Leadville to compete in a 100-mile race, like, no way. She loves this book. It's her Bible. And so, and I think the thing about it is, so, Chrissy Mell's whole thing is about a skirt and a smile. Like that's her philosophy. Yeah, you just need a skirt and a smile. And then you're off for a run. And like, that's Mika's whole thing. Look kind of cute, have a good time, and then the running part's easy.
Wow. I love that. And I was telling you before we started that I should have asked both of you to be a part of this interview, and maybe I'll get Mika on at some point then too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's a great idea.
Well, Chris, what else would you like to share with us about anything maybe you're working on or anything else about the book? Any other thoughts?
Well, I could sort of update you on what has happened with us in the past year, which is a hell of a roller coaster.
Yeah.
One of the downsides of living among Amish neighbors is that they are not too quick to embrace things like masks and vaccines. And as are the rest of our neighbors who are non-Amish. We live in the middle of that kind of part of the country where people seem to think that being angry was a solution to a pandemic. And so we are in this mode last spring of thinking, wait a minute, we have horrible Wi-Fi, like super, super slow. Our kids are trying to do online school and the Wi-Fi is crashing. We live in a log cabin with no neighbors, heated by wood. And most of our neighbors don't drive a car. So I started to look at the reality of, like, if one of us gets sick and the nearest hospital is 30 miles away, we're kind of in a bad situation here. Like I thought, what if I'm in the hospital and the girls are home trying to heat a house with wood and the power goes out, something like that.
Yeah.
Or if an Amish neighbor shows up who's sick with COVID, what do we do? Right. So as we look at the scenario, and we already had this kind of slow burn plan to move to Hawaii when the girls finished school, give Mika finally her chance to go home. And we decided, let's just accelerate the plan. And so we were able, in a matter of 6 weeks, to rehome all the animals, sell the farm, get ourselves set up in Hawaii, pack a crate, and be on our way. So we got the idea like in June 1, and by middle of July, we were gonzo. But the big question, and this was like the first and most difficult thing, was literally we had the idea, hey, let's move to Hawaii. And the second thought was, what are we going to do with the donkeys? Like, because they have to stay together. There's no way we're breaking them up as that three's a team. So we had this new farrier, this woman named Leslie. And so I called Leslie up because, she deals with a lot of farms and farm owners. And I said, hey, Leslie, is there any chance you know anybody who could take in 3 donkeys? And she's like, yeah, this guy, like, I'll take him. Like, you? She's like, yeah, I would love it. She just bought a 150-acre farm. She already had 3 other donkeys. And she was in the midst of installing this like crazy heated underground watering system. So like the donkeys could like push it with their nose in the middle of winter and get fresh water. And I'm like, man, if Sherman gets a look at this operation, he's gonna be pissed he was ever stuck with us. So Leslie's like, I'll take him. So she took all 3 donkeys, and it was such a relief because the big worry was like, I will never, ever put them in the wrong hands. It's not going to happen. And like Leslie's like the best, so yeah. So the donkeys are now living in a lap of luxury, Leslie's lap of luxury. Zeke, while we were on book tour together, he was simultaneously working on his PhD applications. He was applying to graduate school. So we have this thing where we would be like in like Charlotte, and we'd finish an event and we'd go back to the hotel and we'd work on his essays, and then we get burritos and go to sleep. And at the end of this process of like working on his essays on the road, he applies to graduate schools, and They all just said, we want you, dude. He got into Berkeley, Yale, Cornell, University of Colorado at Boulder, just across the board. So at the moment, he's at Berkeley, studying whatever it is, whatever Tony Stark does is what Zeke's doing right now.
Awesome. Thank you for that update on everybody. That's amazing. How's
Yeah.
Tanya doing?
Tanya is like a lightning rod, literally for bad luck. She literally, her farm gets struck by lightning. One of her horses was killed by lightning.
Oh,
It's unbelievable. Luckily, I think it's one of these things where maybe there's a universal power just goes, let's just pick the toughest person on the planet and just mess with them to see what they can put up with, because she's indomitable. She's cheery, like, oh my God, the lightning hit my horse. Ha, ha, ha. So on the face of it, she's going through a tough time, but look at her shrugging it off and moving on.
She sounded like an amazing human.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I want to be really mindful of your time. So I've got one last question for you. It's the question we ask everybody on the podcast. How do you live a life of abundance?
I think adapting to what comes your way. Don't beat yourself up with expectations. I tell my kids this. So our oldest daughter, Maya, was always very driven and always wanted to not miss school and get good grades and was worried about college and SAT prep. And I was like, hey, Maya, don't sacrifice being 16 for being 36. Like, enjoy 16. You're going to be 36, and whatever happens, it's going to happen. So maybe that's it. Like, get into this without worrying. It's not going to be enough. You see these kids all just freaking about college. What am I college going to get to? Who gives a shit? Who cares? Everybody turns out fine. So this might be the worst and most badly phrased advice you've ever gotten, but I think that's it. Like, don't worry about 10 years from now. Just take this moment. It was kind of cool too. If you ever go back and look at pictures of yourself when you're 18, you know that at 18, you were just riddled with self-doubt. Like, my hair is never right, and you look back now, like, dude, I was like hot as crap. Like, I was never cuter than at the moment I thought I was not cute at all.
Yes.
And I think that's so, and I try to make myself mindful of that now. I don't look like an 18-year-old now. I look at myself in the mirror like, dude, who's this old bald dude? But you know what? 10 years from now, you can look back, man, you were a piece of ass. So
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
I love that, Alicia. I do this every day with you. This is fun.
Thank you.
Sure. All right.